And what we wanted to plan for today was kind of our reflections, and we wanted to build them around his friendships, his love of teaching and learning, his appreciation of the outdoors, some music. He loved jazz and classical. And depending on time, a limited period of open mic, and then time for food, drink, and talk with each other. Many of you know that Jeff's goal in retirement was to finish his book on the roots of California's constitutional crisis and the present impasse in Sacramento. After his hospitalization in the fall, he was able to continue work on this book until a few weeks before his death. And Dick Walker, a professor from UC Berkeley, who became head of the California Studies Association, committed to Jeff that he would coordinate finishing his book. Jeff was incredibly moved by this offer. Dick is in France right now, but wrote a wonderful column in the California Studies newsletter and asked me to read a little bit from it. The Center for California Studies and the California Studies Association became a touchstone for all of us with a serious interest in what makes the Golden State tick. At Jeff's insistence, California Studies featured an eclectic mix of writers, poets, activists, teachers, and others of a progressive or unconventional bent, a refreshing alternative to standard academic fare. Jeff's great love was for California and the state's politics. I already missed Jeff's razor wit and cackling laugh, the way he tilted his head as he was about to speak. Jeff was a character, all right, with a certain Western folksy affectation in the way he talked. He was a fabulous raconteur, always ready for the new story and a deftly delivered punchline. He was ever opinionated, never boring, and forever engaged with ideas and the people around him. So that's him. We have three speakers, and then I have some family comments. Malcolm Margolin is an author and book publisher, the founder and owner of Media Books in Berkeley, and founder of Bay Nature and other news we love to read. David Nyor, president and professor at Deep Springs College, where Jeff taught and was emotionally and intellectually linked for decades. And David and Jeff also shared a love for the outdoors. Gene Torkham is professor and colleague from California State University, Sacramento. And Jeff cared a great deal for Gene, and Gene's been instrumental in developing a scholarship in Jeff's memory. So he'll speak now.
Gee, when I think about what I owe Jeff, all I have to do is look around this room. Half my Rolodex is here. You know, when I think of Jeff, it's funny how you picture people. I picture his walking. He had the most amazing way of walking. With the arms swinging, he kind of, the shoulders forward, the eyes darting around. He looked like a log that just got off and was going to head into a bar and get into a fight. And there was this, there was a truculence to it. There was something more than just fight. There was engagement. He was looking to be engaged. He loved to be part of stuff. There was an activity to him. He had the most energetic kind of mind. For years, I would love talking to Jeff about anything whatsoever. He could talk about anything whatsoever, and there was just this sparkling mind. There are some people who end up hitting the ball across the net and nothing comes back. Sometimes there are people who hit the ball across the net, they swallow the damn thing. You can't find it anymore. With Jeff, you hit the ball across the net, and all sorts of stuff comes back. Flocks of birds, herds of antelope, cannonballs. I mean, there was this amazing desire to just get in there and throw things around and play with stuff. He was the most playful person I think I've ever met. Played with words, played with ideas. He was always out there to toss things around. And we literally played. We ended up, I think, maybe 2 or 3 times a month we'd go off and drink some wine and have lunch and play chess. And neither one of us was a very good player. We talked a better game than we played, which is probably a metaphor. But we were good enough to know that we weren't very good. And we would play chess, and you get to know somebody from the play chess, especially when you've played hundreds of games for the last 20 years we've been playing. And it's this kind of intellectual area, it's kind of abstract, and you see what he does. He was lousy at big strategies. Where he was really brilliant was when he was cornered. He was so great when he was cornered, he would bring out the best in him. He was crafty, he was surprising, he was smart. He would make these astounding moves. And then when he lost, he was so gracious about it. He you'd meet him and then he'd look around, he'd surprise and say, gee, I thought I had a one game. But there was also a tremendous generosity there. There was, after he lost, he would talk about how good you were, he would talk about how much he enjoyed the game. He would go over it again where he had made mistakes and where you had been brilliant. There was this wonderful generosity to Jeff. When he was running the California Studies Association, he would get conferences together. These conferences were just astonishing things. You'd end up looking out at the panel, and you'd end up seeing a Nobel laureate, and a UPS driver, and a poet, and a drunk, and they'd all be sitting there, and Jeff had all gotten them up in the same place, and they were all talking together. And it took a kind of irreverent mind. He had the most wonderful irreverence to see the undercurrent of things, to pull things together. We shared a whole lot. I think we kind of understood each other. We both were of the same generation. We both had the same political ideas, kind of. More or less. I don't think anybody had the same political ideas. That there was the same interest in California and California studies. We knew the same people. But there was something else that brought us together. We came from that same kind of Jewish background. And it was a background where the old country was a couple of steps removed. There was still the sounds of Yiddish. There was still that wonderful emphasis, that valuing of smarts, of humor. I mean, being humorous, being funny was very, very highly valued. Being smart was highly valued. Being a smart aleck was okay. I mean, just being out there in the world, and being active, and doing things. And it was part of that old world. The previous generation used it for self-gain. We grew up in a softer generation. We ended up pulling another strand from that heritage, which was public service. And Jeff was so interested, he was using that smarts for social justice, he was using it for union stuff, he was using it for the rights of people, he was using it to make a better world. And it was just a lovely thing that Jeff was doing. I owe him a great precedent there. I run a publishing company that I look around and the number of people that Jeff introduced me to that have helped create my world have been just legendary in the region. He was on my board, he wrote a book with us, he was a good friend, he was an advisor. That if I'd been successful, he's been a partner in so many ways. And I think there was a part of Jeff that always felt he felt unfulfilled in some ways. He'd never written a great book. He never was part of the grand intellectual world. He was never got a great university appointment. And there was always a part of him that wished he had done better. But I think his value, I think his work was in the communities of people that he built around him. And I think the communities of people that owe stuff to him, that he brought people together. He was an instigator, he was a spark, he created scenes, he created community, and I think that this community is where we owe the greatest amount. And I'll just end it with, I think you can't talk about Jeff without talking about his sense of humor. And I'll end it with this observation that Jeff and I used to make many times at memorial services and when somebody died. It was a piece of Sufi wisdom that isn't it wonderful that death comes at the end of life rather than at the beginning. And I'm sorry that Jeff is gone, but it was just a joy having known him, and I'm glad that I had all those years with him. Thanks.
I feel a bit of a stranger here. I'm Deep Springs College, so while most of you don't know me, I actually feel like I know many of you because I've heard Jack talk about many people in this room for many years. Jeff was a strong presence out of Deep Springs, and I realize that's a presence which may not have been evident to everyone who knew him here in Berkeley or at Sac State. But he was at the college, coming and going as what I think of as a recidivist visiting professor for just about 40 years. And during that time, he had an enormous impact on the community. And he had, I think it's fair to say, a strong hand, if not the major hand, by some of the ideals of human character that our students work on and try to embody and hold each other to, even though they have no idea what they're doing. Jeff came out with Jeff Shaw first in 1970, and He taught over the years a number of political theory and interdisciplinary seminars. They all had names like liberty and community, authority and community, nature and community, work and community. And Jeff, in fact, got me first out there about 19 years ago, so I've known him that long, and ever since then, sometimes infrequent, but I think very strong with Jeff and with Nora, and have certainly therefore heard daily all about their children. So I wish I could get friendship justice. I'd almost rather talk about that, but I'm not sure I have the ability to do that. I certainly don't have the time. And I also don't know nearly enough bad puns in order to do it. So I'm going to do the easy thing instead. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what Jeff represented to his students at Deep Springs College and what he meant to that community. And I realize that will be a little bit different than the way we're talking about him, because I'll be describing the way he was infected with young people who are looking for models of how to be in the world. But I think you'll probably recognize what I have to say. At Deep Springs, the students study the liberal arts. They also work manual labor at a branch half the time, and they are engaged in a rather radically deliberative self-governance project. They talk about and try to govern their own lives in as much of the college as they can. And what that means at Deep Springs is that political theory is a practical science, and it also means that it's often kind of a contact sport. And since I think for Jeff, political theory, which was his academic discipline, was always a practical science also, you can easily imagine what a congenial place that would have been for him. And as for the contact sport part, I can ask you to imagine how many arrogant 18-year-olds come to Deep Springs imagining that communitarians are mushy, soft, fuzzy, compliant individuals until they're running Jeff across the table with the boarding days. Deep Springs is also a small community. We have not very many students, we have kids around, friends around. And so Jeff, I think, very much felt like his family, certainly his grew up there, and that was part of his home, as it is for Montez. And to talk to Jeff about Deep Springs was always to talk to him about Jake, what Jake had done there, what he tried to do. It's hard to imagine, how wonderful it would be to run into a good teacher if you're sick and tired of bad ones. And one of our alumni who's here today, in fact, Paul, wrote to me the other day that when he first met Jeff in 1976, he said that when Jeff and Jack and Hannah Pickett showed up, it was everything changed. He said that there were long conversations deep into the night, that Jeff was always willing to go out on a work field to work with the students at Deep Springs. And then most of all for him, it was Jeff who fascinated him because he was droll, sarcastic, direct, well-read but never doctrinaire. He was what he needed, Paul wrote, the requisite breath of fresh air. And of course, on occasion, a wind of correction. He gave me, he said, a dose of training and the conviction that the left was okay, so long as there was a good brain. Now, when I compare this aspect of Deep Springs to the stories that Jeff told me about faculty politics at Sac State and about his struggles with the statewide union and with the National Faculty Association, it's easy to imagine that Deep Springs was restored and think of him. It must have been nice to spend a few weeks now and then in a place which is almost a natural aristocracy, where it doesn't matter what your status is in some big system, where you can just be who you are and gain authority in the community by being yourself. I think it must have been nice for him to get out periodically in summertime from what must have been sometimes the dispirited tedium of large-scale institutional studies. But I have to tell you, that's never what Jeff said about it. What he always talked about when he talked about Deep Springs, and he talked about it a lot, was he talked about the students. He talked about the people there, the other people working there, the community, but most of all the students. And he remembered them too. He remembered them for years. Jeff had, it seemed to me, the genuine philosopher's love of gossip. And by that I mean a lot of gossip, which isn't petty, it isn't self-serving, it's not about one-upsmanship. It's just an expression of a sort of wide open wonder and when using it like that, the astonishing fantasy of human beings in the world and the things that they do. And in that respect, talking to Jeff is a little bit like reading Homer. And I mean by that aspect of Homer who every time he trots some guy out to be killed in a battle by one of the heroes, he has to tell you all about who his parents were. He has to tell you who he married. He married the older daughter of so-and-so, and she was not only the older daughter, but she was the wisest and the best at all the crafts. And so think of what an extraordinary person he must have been. And then Poseidon God did what means his hand, and they just cut him down and fight over the best of it. And Jeff always reminded me of that aspect of Homer. Because I always see that as this kind of resentment of the shallowness of the present, of the mere present, and the desire to have what the richer, deeper aspects of what everybody is all together in front of you when you're talking about them and thinking about them. It seemed to me like an act of intellectual integrity to tell these stories. And some people can get tiresome when they do that because they're doing it to control the room. But Jeff never felt that way to me. He felt to me like he was telling me stories about everybody he wanted to tell me an anecdote about. Because it was all outward directed. Because it was just so fascinating who these people were and how they managed to become something distinct from out of the morass of external determinations which might trap them. And a kind of delight in the craft of finding just the right answer. And you can imagine what that was like for students to be around, because it all reflected back onto them in his quite genuine interest. They didn't feel like they had no weight and no substance in the way that they walked on the earth. But I do have to say that Jeff was rather unlike Homer in another sense, which is that he didn't really have much attraction that I could tell to tragedy. It seems to me that where Homer is interested in showing you who these people are so that it's all the more poignant when they just get flattened. Right? Jeff was what Jeff substituted in my mind for a sense of tragedy was an abiding affection for the dignity of human work. And it deep springs that everybody's working all the time. Everybody's trying to develop some grace and some craft. And everybody has the opportunity to shame themselves with the pathetic and hilarious way. All the time. And Jeff's sort of infectious curiosity and enthusiasm for all of those crafts and all those successes and all of those hilarious failures was absolutely infectious. Right? And it alerted people to the unconscious kind of grace and wisdom that was there to be had and appreciated in craftsmanship and work and in the people who did it. And that appreciation for craftsmanship extended to his appreciation for the wilderness. Deep Springs is remote. It's in the deserts, near the mountains. He always took students into the mountains, hikes in the desert. And he always tried to teach them how to do it right. He didn't just take them out, he wanted to teach them how to do something right with a sense of properness, with the extra effort that it takes to do something with a little bit of integrity and grace.
We grew up near a beach and spent lots of time hiking and camping around the area, and I think this kindled his love for issues around land and water and the evolving California landscape, both geographic and social. In a recent chapter, he wrote, quote, "I discovered this thread of state life when I was 8 or so, hiking with my cousin through the brush atop Point Loma in San Diego. Pushing through the brush, we suddenly found ourselves in ancient Greece, we thought, complete with temples, columns, and amphitheater. It was the ruins of Catherine Tingley's recently abandoned Universal Brotherhood and Theosophical Seminary. California has always been a place where if you just parted the shrubbery around the corner, you'd stumble over a covey of utopians." Jeff and I also performed skits like an old vaudeville team, as Lustig and Lustig. Our mother wrote the scripts. This evolved into Ferber and Lustig, as Jeff and a friend, Rick Ferber, took over the mantle. It was with Rick that Jeff decided to ride rails to San Francisco, cajoling me into dropping them at the tracks and fibbing to our parents that his bus got off on time. Turns out they suspected something was amiss and went to see the bus off. And he did get much better at planning his rebellions as time went on. I think we all knew not to argue with Jeff unless we were ready. He believed strongly in his commitments and could back them up. And this was often helpful to me, not just in my growing, but as we became more involved in political action. When I got out of jail during FSM, I called our parents to tell them I was okay. Well, they were horrified. And immediately said, "Have you talked to your brother?" And I said I hadn't had a chance because he wasn't released yet. Well, to coin my sister's phrase, they plots to that point. And needless to say, they knew that Jeff didn't tread lightly, and they were willing to learn from him what it was all about. He was an early and able storyteller with an amazing memory for jokes that he could bring forward in the right context and at the drop of a hat, while he wove you into discussion or analysis of something he cared deeply about. He could turn the simplest observation or interaction into a story of discovery, partially to examine what was going on. What were the cues? I think his fascination also went into the skill of games: chess, poker, hearts, games of strategy and outsmarting the opponent, which continued up until this May on his birthday, when he stayed up until around midnight to beat me at gin. What was also interesting to me was his ability to be both theoretical and then to find a creative way to organize people and turn it into action. And several examples. UC Berkeley has an orientation week for new students, and it's called orientation, and you meet in Sproul Plaza. And Jeff and a bunch of friends planned this orientation week. And this orientation week was a tour of the political sites of the campus, and they arrived with hats, brochures, the whole thing. The Free University of Berkeley and the Free University were out of the free speech movement, had a magazine called Steps, and it was attempts to make post-secondary education more relevant and accessible. The California Studies Conference has been mentioned. There was a Humboldt Labor History Project, and he hoped that his current book would launch kind of similar new directions, both for him and for the conversation about California and the way to build California. And then I had lots of other observations. Loyalty to his friends. When Nora and Jeff got together, a close friend of hers said one of the greatest things about Jeff was his friends and his unbelievable engagement with and commitment to them. As a father, what a surprise for him, single parenthood. He worked hard throughout their life together, and what a bond. Jeff viewed himself as an itinerant academic, and he was accompanied by his itinerant son. And Jake and Jeff were joined at the hip, and I know this loss was enormous for Jake. As a husband with Nora the last couple of decades, he was able to share a love of books, music, and ideas. And as his grandchildren got older, Jeff enjoyed being engaged in their learning, what books they were reading, and their future dreams. One of the things he was saddest about when he was dying was he would not be able to see them transition through college and into adulthood. Well, having mentioned Rick Ferber earlier, who is now a physician and a fantasy writer in New Mexico, I received a terrific remembrance from him yesterday that reflects Jeff in the middle of his college years. It's terrific. Quote, "This is Rick Ferber writing. I'd be there with you, but karma has treated me to the new adventure of Parkinson's disease, and travel is a bit too much of an adventure. I've known Jeff since junior high. I used to hide out at Jeff's house because I thought his parents were so much hipper than mine. We read Mad magazine and listened to cool jazz. We wrote and performed vaudeville comedy sketches, never dreaming how we were dooming ourselves to lives of anachronistic discontent. I fell in adolescent love with his sister and ignored his little brother. And later we reconnected in San Francisco, where we lived with other dreamers in an old fire station, tried our hands at improvisational theater, dared midnight streets and crazed days. We were members of the crazy cosmic clown paint crew, a police lineup of artists and poets and actors, old radicals and commies. We painted like loonies, specializing in restoring decayed Victorian palaces. We worked out of a disreputable old panel truck with ladders piled on top, a madcap Keystone Cops crew, climbing on teetering scaffolding, slinging ladders around, declaiming poetry and its essential philosophy from rooftops, swilling chocolate milk and valving toasted scoop pies. Mad we were, but we did good work, and after work we drank cheap wine and a clangorous North Beach night with bums who had once gotten love with Hemingway at Picasso in Paris. In 1963, Jeff and I hitched and rode boxcars out to Washington, D.C. to hear Martin Luther King talk about his dream. Then we hitched up to New York to the Bowery Theater and write passionate street poetry and chase women. We lived in cheap hotels and also expensive hotels, which we burned for the bills. And sometimes we slept in bus stations and parks, and we argued about Marxism on Fifth Avenue, discussed French absurdist theater on Broadway, and we watched out for the ghosts of Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg, which was odd because they were still alive. We visited Steve up in Evanston, got drunk in Chicago, and went to hear an unknown folk singer named Bob Dylan. We were young intellectual revolutionaries, reveling in our prowess and youth and infallibility. What did we know then of death? Then came many years wherein we seemed to settle down, like motorboats tied to piers. Jeff in Berkeley, me in New Mexico. We saw little of each other during those decades, but when we did get together, we could always see past the balding guys to the happy beatniks beneath. I never saw Jeff while he was ill, but I talked on the phone with him a couple of times, and he sounded the same as ever. Smart aleck voice, as if he had come from Brooklyn. Infectious laugh, a cross between a chuckle and a giggle and a guffaw. Well, Jeff, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. You'll always be part of me. I'm sure I got some stuff wrong, or made some things up, but you're the historian. I'm the fictioneer. Anyway, it's been a good run for a couple of would-be law veterans, and a guy couldn't ask for a better or more interesting friend than you. I wouldn't trade our travels, our time together for anything. Listen, I hear your music cue now. Love Rick. It's great. So that is the music cue. And Jeff loved jazz, and he also loved the music of my son Janos. So
I was just thinking it would be pretty easy to put together a song because I always enjoyed playing for Jeff, definitely. Like actually my grandmother as well, Jeff's mother, Jane. Both of them were really fond of music, and you could tell when someone's really fond of music and play music because it's a lot easier to play. Definitely. And Jeff, I went over to his house when he was sick, and I'm more of a saxophone player than a piano player, and I was going to play him some piano. He had a piano at the house, and I knew he was ill, so I wanted to make some music in the house and make the atmosphere nice. And I hadn't prepared any music, and I just thought I would just play. But Jeff liked music so much that it became more of a concert. He invited some people over, and everybody was sitting, waiting for every note, you know, which is a lot of pressure. So I was like, okay, I gotta get more serious. But it was a really nice time we had for about an hour or two, and I'll remember that. And by chance, came across a song that he liked a lot called Skylark. And he told me that every time he's hanging out with people and he's talking and Skylark comes on the radio, he would stop because he thought the melody was so pretty and he caught his ear. So I said, okay, for sure, for Jess Memorial, I'll play Skylark. And I spent all week, you know, playing around with Skylark, which I could play a little of, but I came to the conclusion a few nights ago, late at night, that I didn't really want to play Skylark because I was thinking of Jeff and another music. I went through his collection the other day, just sitting around. It has so much blues music. And I started to think that Jeff's personality is a little more like blues music to me. You know, like a slow blues or something, because you tell a story. When you're playing blues, you tell a real story. And there's little quirks. You set up your punchlines, like Jeff would set up his jokes, you know. And there's a lot of oral history in blues. Blues just goes back 100 years, 110 years maybe, and maybe before that. And it's oral tradition. There's a lot of history, and Jeff's just such a historian, you know. And so I was sitting around late at night, and I kind of wrote a little blues and tried to capture a little out of Jeff. And I don't know if it's a good song or a bad song. It's just what I felt like playing. So I'll just play a little of that, and it'll probably sound all right without the microphone.
And we have a number of people who would like to make some comments, and if we have time, we'll have some open mic time also. Doug Lummis, Frank Forbick, Evie Craig, Dick Garland, Mark Brown, Wes Riley, and a letter from Paul Brennan from Ireland. And in that order, and then we'll see where it goes from there.
It couldn't last. Spring passed. Jeff, a good-sized man who comfortably carried 185 pounds, was reduced to less than 120. No longer clear-headed, he died in early summer in a fog, comforted by his wife Nora, his brother Steve, and his son Jake. Like Proust, he called for his manuscript on his deathbed. This is a little bit different than some of the other folks said. Except for his devotion to his students, which was profound, Jeff was miscast as an academic. Not that he couldn't do it well enough. His first book, Corporate Liberalism, there's a debate here about corporate liberalism. His first book, Corporate Liberalism, has one of the first and still best discussions of how corporations became persons, and he continued to publish in scholarly and popular journals as they bounced him around from one campus to another. From UC Riverside to UC Berkeley, up to Humboldt State, back down to Riverside, and then to Sacramento State, where he settled in to stay. Publish and perish, he used to joke, but the truth was that no matter how distinguished his work, he was too combative, too rough-edged, too democratic for the Academy, or at least for those who ran it, as his pleasure in politics, in actually doing it, made him a series of good friends among his colleagues as well as enemies among his bosses. While he loved long walks and could spend hours alone at his desk writing and rewriting a single paragraph, he was a man of action, not contemplation. Jeff got things done. That's what Doug and I agreed to in that conversation. Jeff got things done. He breathed life into the Free University of Berkeley in the early 1960s. He almost single-handedly edited and produced our Little Circle's attempt at a magazine, Steps, in the middle 60s. He organized teach-ins, debates, and protests in the 70s and 80s as he was pushed from one university to the next. He founded the California Studies Association in 1989, and for 10 years made it as freewheeling and lively as any academic association could have been. He built the Teachers Union at Sacramento State into a significant force on campus, which together with his writing about the corporation of the university earned him the honor of a prominent place on Chancellor Reed's enemies list. And finally, in a lovely union of his commitment to friendship, his organizational savvy, and his determined will, he built from scratch the Paul Brennan Defense Committee, making it not only a spirited defense for his friend Paul, but an indictment of the booming primate gulag for immigrants. Everywhere, it was friends and foes, good times and combat. As most everything he built either perished or slipped away, leaving him not bitter, but looking for the next thing to do. Knowing full well that whatever it was, he and his friends would, in one of his favorite expressions, burn that bridge when we come to it. He was at his intellectual best when those he loved were going astray. Most clearly California and the left. Some of his academic writing could be ponderous, as he tried to mash thought upon thought into a single sentence, as if he were a truck driver trying to back a full 40-foot trailer into a too narrow space. But he talked straight to the left. Most memorable was his 1977 essay on contemporary U.S. Leninism, when he, at the time, when he decried the then faddish attempt at party building, and famously, well, famous among a few people, when famously he chided the new communist movement for Neoplatonism. The proletariat and the party, he wrote, were not the real, live, working people we saw before our eyes, nor our little grouplets of would-be revolutionaries, but were ideal types of Leninist initiates who claimed to know an unseen reality behind the mere appearances of life. The only response then and now was and is touché. Last week, it wasn't last week, I wrote this, the time is, it was a few months ago. I drove up to Berkeley to visit Nora and tell her that I hadn't been able to write this remembrance and I didn't know if I could. We sat in the living room. I think many of you people have sat in that same living room. We sat in the living room, I on the couch, Nora to my right in a chair at one end of the long coffee table, still filled with some of Jeff's magazines and books. On the piano across the room were the family pictures. Jeff with Jake, the son he loved and raised. Jeff with Nora, his true partner. Jeff with his friend and teacher, Jack. The grandchildren, Eli and Sonia. Nora finally brought the bottle out. It seemed a beautiful room, like Jeff. Sturdy and light. Jeff's chair, a bit higher than the couch, was at the other end of the coffee table. But where was Jeff? Dead and gone.
I didn't really get to know Jeff until he entered the government department at Sac State in the late 80s. But I met him at least 2 decades before that. For sure, in 68 or 69, when my husband and I went to spend a weekend with Jack Sharp at his cabin in Whitethorn. There was another couple there, one of whom turned out to be Jeff. Neither Jeff nor I remembered it until about 2005, when I found a photograph of that visit. It showed me and some strange guy with a lot of hair. I showed it to Jeff and he said, "That's me." I didn't see him, I think, in the intervening 20 years, but our lives revolved around the same powerful poles: Berkeley and the university, California, a love of the land, mountains, wild places, hiking, political theory, and a dedication to teaching the state university system. And maybe most important, the great tides that flowed out of the 60s. So that even though my friendship with Jeff is fairly recent, I feel we grew up together. We were formed by the same remarkable world. I have to say, it was a marvelous time in American life. And for me, there's no better embodiment of it than Jeff. Jeff was a free thinker to the end. He saw through the bullshit. He had intellectual and moral integrity. He never sold out. He had courage. And I would say that he never seemed to struggle for those qualities. They were who he was. He could do no other than that. For me personally, the most moving part of Jeff was the way he faced death. Probably the most difficult challenge all of us will face that really reveals the character of the person. He faced it in his characteristic way, straight ahead. He had humor. He had no self-pity. He had time and concern for people who visited him. But above all, he was straight ahead about what he faced. What an inspiration for me and for the rest of us.
Steve has asked me to speak about Jeff's role in the California Faculty Association, the union that he was such an important part of. Jeff and I were friends for decades, but we became comrades in arms when he was chapter president of the faculty union at Sac State, and I had the same post at Sonoma State. We both campaigned to replace the leadership of the union, the California Faculty Association, with a progressive slate of officers whom we hoped would provide the leadership to fight the erosion of state political and financial support for public higher education, particularly in the California State University system. The group prevailed in 1999 when our candidates won statewide office in CFA. During the next 5 years, Jeff served the CFA in a variety of roles. He was Sacramento State Chapter President. He represented chapter presidents on the statewide CFA Board of Directors. He was elected Secretary of the California Faculty Association, and he was selected as its representative to the American Association of University Professors Collective Bargaining Congress. In addition to his scholarly work in political theory and in California studies, Jeff was an active and articulate spokesperson for the political independence of the Academy. He wrote articles about the growing influence of corporate money in university affairs in publications of CFA, the American Association of University Professors, and the National Education Association. He was alarmed by the so-called public-private partnerships and academic settings which he viewed as a stealth takeover of the public university by corporate interests. Jeff did this while at the same time functioning as a key person in the leadership of CFA. I think it's fair to say that he was unique in CFA, publicly engaged in the nuts and bolts of the politics in the union, and at the same time writing about the larger issues for a wider audience within academia. Recalling his days as a free speech movement activist, as we know he was arrested in the famous Sproul Hole bust, Jeff wrote critically of the work of Clark Kerr and his idea of the multiversity, when at the time of his death, Kerr was being hailed as a visionary university president. He argued that Kerr had provided a rationale 50 years ago for the transformation of the liberal arts university into a handmaiden of corporatism. Jeff was no newcomer to this discussion, as we know. His first book, Corporate Liberalism, was an analytic history of the development in the United States of this particular ideological stance. He considers Kerr's construction to be firmly in that tradition. Jeff wanted CFA to be a leader in the effort to preserve the integrity of higher education, and he argued forcefully in the union for an allocation of money and personnel resources to carry on this larger struggle. As Jeff came to political maturity in the New Left in the 60s, he was very much his own person in politics. He chose the role he wanted to play, the one he felt best suited his temperament and abilities, and he would play no other. Jeff's personal style and political discourse was uncompromising, sharp in critique, and impatient with what he considered sloppy thinking or careless use of language. He was admired by many, but he was not above the cutting remark or dismissive observation, a characteristic that could get him into difficulties. As his poker buddies will attest, Jeff did not easily resist the temptation for a risque comment, one that would surely not meet the standards of second-wave feminism, but which would likely pass the more nuanced standard of the third. Jeff's initial field of graduate study at Berkeley, political theory, was with Professor Roland Shar and Jacobson, names familiar to many of you in this room. As good an example of the organic intellectual that there is, Jeff's interest in political theory found its concrete expression in a wide variety of political causes. He always had a general interest in what it takes to organize people for collective political action. But his specific interest was in union organizing. In CFA, he was part of a continuing discussion which distinguished organizing from mobilizing. For Jeff, organizing meant creating the structures within a union that would allow the members themselves to generate the program and provide the leadership for collective action. He contrasted this model with one in which a union is in effect directed by permanent paid staff, the leadership is rotated among a few self-selected persons, and the membership is mobilized from time to time, given t-shirts, buttons, balloons, and banners to appear at public demonstrations designed to showcase the union's power. It should come as no surprise then that Jeff, although very weak, assisted by Jake, made a Herculean effort to be present at a recent discussion held at ILWU headquarters in San Francisco of his friend Frank Barticky's recent book, the Frank whom you heard so eloquently discuss his relationship with Jeff. Frank's book, Trampling Out the Vintage, a critical assessment of the United Farm Workers Union and its leader, Cesar Chavez. Frank and longtime organizer Mike Miller led a lively discussion of the organizing strategies employed in the various periods of the union's history. As it happened, that was Jeff's last public event. To many in CFA, Jeff seemed what used to be called a tough guy. He walked with a muscular, self-confident swagger, and he spoke with an air of authority. But as is often the case with close friends, those to whom one willingly confesses weaknesses and vulnerabilities, Jeff could reveal a thin skin and a tender core. Shortly before he died, he told me that he himself was surprised that he found great pleasure in having Nora read poetry to him. He asked me whether I found that odd. As someone who had shared ups and downs with him during the past 20 years, I didn't find it odd at all, and that is what I told him. He looked at me with a thankful smile, and then he moved quickly to some other topic. Jeff lived up to the meaning of the Lustig name, the German meaning. Although he had more than his share of personal and professional struggles, it's clear that Jeff got a big kick out of living, and he had the knack of infusing others with the joie de vivre that he had. His family will miss him sorely, but so too will his many friends and comrades with whom he shared a life. And so there you have it.
I first met Jeff 15 years ago at a California Studies Association conference, and we then met for coffee a couple weeks afterwards, and he generously agreed to read a chapter of mine for my dissertation that I was working on at the time, living in Berkeley. And we had the first of many wonderful conversations, batting back and forth between Machiavelli and Rousseau and current politics. Toward the end of the conversation, he told me about a new political journal he was working with some others to get started, and asked me if I'd like to be involved. And then he leaned forward and said, "Don't tell anyone about this just yet. Loose lips sink ships." And I thought, here is someone who's not your regular academic professor. Here is someone who sails ships. He has ideals, he thinks strategically, and he likes words that rhyme. And that was the first of many conversations. And in thinking about what to say about Jeff, what I keep coming back to is just how much I love talking with him. And how every time we would talk, I just never wanted it to end. We talked in his office in the morning sometimes before classes would start. We talked walking along the banks of the river. We talked in his living room, eating cafes and bars, dinner, over in restaurants. And it was always a real privilege just to share that conversation. One of the things we talked about most often was teaching and our students. And I remember once he told me about a student of mine who'd come to him to complain about the grade that she'd gotten in my class. And I had already emailed it to her. She told me her complaint, and I responded and tried to explain why she got the grade she got. She was a good student, but she got a B because she almost never participated in class discussion. And she said to him, Professor Brown told me he gave me a B because I didn't participate and because I was demure. And I don't think I should be marked down for my character. And Jeff said, well, are you sure he said you were demure? Maybe he said that when he called on you that you demurred. She said, what does that mean? And he explained it to her, and she said, oh, well, yeah, maybe that was it. She said she'd go check the email and look up the word. As you know, Jeff was very involved in the free speech movement in Berkeley in '64 and in other political activities in Berkeley in the '60s. And when we would talk in small groups and large, he would often tell stories about those times. Sometimes the stories were a little long, sometimes we'd heard them before. But it usually really didn't matter because they were wonderful stories, they had a political point, and it was worth hearing them more than once. And for me personally, they were also important because they were many times very similar stories to the ones I had heard growing up in Berkeley. And they echoed stories I heard from other people, and there was always a certain connection between the stories he told and my childhood in Berkeley that gave them a certain added meaning. And just this morning, actually, this sounds like I'm making it up, but it actually happened. Just this morning, I was talking with my son about what he'd been doing with our visitors. The last couple of days, we have visitors from Germany at the moment. My wife's cousin and her husband and their 2 kids. And our son Josh, who's 13, had gone with their boy downtown to walk around Telegraph. And I asked him, well, what did you guys do? Did you go to Blondie's, get some pizza? And he said, yeah, we did. And we stopped at the mural on Hay Street, and I explained to him about the pictures. Enough said. I miss Jeff terribly, but I'm going to end with the way he ended his emails to me. Onward.
Frank mentioned Paul Brennan, and Paul was an Irish friend of Jeff's who fought with the IRA, escaped from prison, and worked in this country for 20 years. And even after he was pardoned abroad, he was arrested and deported from the U.S. for expired papers. He lives in Ireland and can travel actually anywhere in the world but the U.S. Jeff worked hard to get him released while he was in the States, and Paul sent a remembrance he loved read. So this is from Paul. This eulogy has been read on my behalf because I cannot physically be present with you. My name is Paul Brennan, and Jeff is one of my nearest and dearest friends. My wife Joanna and Jeff's wife Nora are also best friends. Indeed, that's how we met. For over 20 years, I resided in Berkeley, where we often spent time together at each other's houses, at parties and gatherings over the years, and Jeff and I became very close. So it was with great sorrow that I penned these words for those gathered here, not just to mourn Jeff's untimely departure, but more so to celebrate his life, because that's what a memorial should be. Alas, he was taken from us all too soon, just when he should have been enjoying his long-deserved retirement from academia. And it's difficult to understand the hows and why this should befall such a good person, as Jeff surely was. These are questions without answers, and we should not dwell or ponder them, but rather highlight the positives of his life and celebrate our dear friend, husband, father, grandfather, stepfather, brother, brother-in-law, uncle, teacher, colleague, and neighbor, all of which he was, and more. Jeff was more than just a friend to me. He was a mentor, an advisor, and above all, he was there for me when my own political problems followed me from that troubled province, Ulster, in Ireland. More than a few of you here will know or have read of these details. Jeff understood politics and activism, as his history here in Berkeley and his involvement in the free speech movement of the 60s loudly proclaimed. So he knew the wider issues of my plight, apart from just getting me out of jail, and had no hesitation in stepping forward to help me when it counted, as indeed other friends and family did. But Jeff was always at the forefront when he identified an issue or cause that he believed deserved his attention, and more importantly, his support and active involvement. Those of you who knew Jeff will know he was outspoken and wasn't afraid to say the uncomfortable truths as he saw them, sometimes to his own academic detriment. But that was him, that was Jeff. He was a stalwart for me when I needed him, as he was to others whose causes he took up. The last time we saw each other was in Mexico, where we were for the wedding of Nora's boy Jacob, and we had some time to relax and catch up with each other, bathing in the warm waters off Veracruz, and eating and drinking with our wives and other friends and family who had traveled down for the event. I was so grateful for the opportunity to see them all again, but especially Jeff, because we had developed such a close bond over those many years. We talked of many things, as we often did, and of our different life paths and experiences. He had a lively interest in Irish history and politics, past and present, and could draw out the parallels and contrasts between what was happening in other struggles around the world and what was occurring within the U.S. at those particular times. I learned a lot from him. As I mentioned earlier, Jeff met his wife Nora through her daycare center, where Jeff's son Jacob went. After many years, a romance developed and blossomed. When they eventually did get married, it was my former lawyer, Jim Larson, after being elevated to the federal magistrate's bench and after he left my case, who officiated at their marriage ceremony in his new office, and in fact joined us afterwards for the celebration dinner in San Francisco. Jeff got to know him through his involvement in my case, and I was very pleased he had happily agreed to Jeff's request to wed them. I believe it was also Jim's first wedding as a new magistrate. This was just another connection that drew us all closer. Now, Jeff wasn't perfect, as none of us are, and he had his quirks, as again we all do. But one that often amused me when we'd be over at Jeff's and Nora's place was the long-running tiff they'd have over the central heating. And some of you may recognize this. Anyway, Jeff was forever readjusting the heating thermostat downwards after Nora had it set, complaining it was too high. Well, Jeff, I hate to say this, but Nora was right on this one. We could have done with a few more degrees many a time. Though in Jeff's defense, he and I did discuss a new heating system to replace the old one, and he was considering it when I left. Hopefully, Jeff, wherever you are, they've got the heating just right for you. And now, Nora, the thermostat is all yours. Ironically, both Jeff and Nora had a trip planned to go to Iceland this summer, then to fly down to Ireland for a visit with me here in County Donegal, where I now live. A really beautiful coastal county that I know he would have loved and appreciated. Sadly, you never made it, my friend, and I was so looking forward to seeing you once more. I will forever miss your quick wit, devilish good and frequent gallows humor, and your warm smiles and laughter. That's how I shall remember you. But still parts of me can't believe you're gone. I scroll through my cell phone book, and there you are. I check my recent emails, and there you are. I look at my photo albums, and there you are. I still can't believe it's real. It has been and is a great honor and privilege to have known you and to have been counted one of your friends, and to have you counted as one of my nearest and dearest friends, and dare I say, comrade. For you fought the good fight, right to the end, against the wrongs and injustices in your own inimitable way. Farewell, Jeff. I will never see your likes again in my time. I shall remember you till the end of my days with greatest fondness, appreciation, respect, and love. Farewell, my friend. Farewell. We have some time for a few comments from the floor. If there's anybody that wants to speak. Yes.
I have the sense that I can contribute a tiny sliver here within this amazing, context. Looking around these pictures, I'm looking at that one over there on the right, and I kind of think that's Jeff at a meeting. And I have a sense that perhaps what I'm saying will give a sort of a context of a transition from the time when he was hitchhiking around the country and, slipping away from hotel bills or whatever he was doing, until suddenly he was an activist. I met Jeff because of an alphabetic coincidence. My name is Long, L-O, His name is Lustig, L-U. And as a result, he and I were seated next to one another on an airplane from San Francisco to New York in 1964, and I have to sadly correct my friend over there, it was 64 that the Cuba trip took place. There had been one in 63, but Jeff and I were on the 64 trip, and we were breaking the travel ban. And here we are, the two L's, and we hit it off. We talked and talked, you know, there you go, Jeff the talker. So we talked across the country, and it turned out that there was a K across the aisle from me named Alan Krebs, who some of you may know. And he and his wife Sharon and his son, their son, Thorsten Dublin Krebs, who was 7 years old at the time. There's 5 of us, and a fellow behind us, Bob Mates, who all of you, some of you know, who was an M. So the KLM group, by the time we finished our trip, we were a solid contingent. And in order to get that 90 miles from Florida to Cuba, we had to fly first to New York City, and then we changed planes and we flew to Paris. And then, given that we were in Paris, of course, we landed in the evening and they said, we're going to get on another plane tomorrow morning. So there's 6 of us, spent the whole night wandering around Paris. We went to Les Halles and had onion soup, and we went here and there. And, so then we had to fly to Prague, Czechoslovakia, in order to get a Russian plane to come back to Cuba, to Havana. And as I say, here we were all sitting right there, and every once in a while we'd get up and go talk to somebody else, but pretty much we became a little collective, so to speak, or at least a group on this trip. And as we traveled around Cuba, every day there would be a new place to go, a farm or one thing or another. We began to cut out from the bus, and we would just leave early, and we would wander around town, and we would talk to people. "Me gusta la revolución," and they would all flip out. "Yes, we love it. Come home with us, and let us tell you about this and that." And I suspect that Jeff, who looked a lot like that at the time, he was 21 years old, this was impressive to him. And so we went to these various places. We stayed in the Hotel Nacional, which is the place where Al Pacino and his friends cut up the cake in The Godfather, you know. We went to Minas del Frio, which is high up in the Sierra Maestra, where Fidel and his group had their camp. We actually met Fidel Castro. Che Guevara came into this room that we were sitting there, and he put his leg up on the desk, and he sat there and he talked to us for hours, smoked a cigar. We had this incredible experience of getting turned on, this "Me gusta la revolución," yes, we love it, this is what's happening. We went to Carnival in Santiago de Cuba, which was the most black and most revolutionary province of all of them, where the biggest latifundio were. And we went to Moncada, which is where Fidel and his group had first attacked, the Batista forces. And where he made his, in the trial, he made his speech, "History will absolve him." So when I think about Jeff, and I started thinking about this, and I realized that we had just gotten home in that summer, and it was only a few weeks later before there's Jeff sitting in Sproul Plaza looking at Mario Savio on the car, making his speech about spindling and mutilating and so on. And then a very short time after that, Jeff himself was in jail, And so, I don't know, I think this was a significant summer time, and that's what I would like to share with you. And certainly history has absolved the both of them. So, thank you.
Hi, my name is Richard Borovitz, and I first met Jeff at a trial to be in a speech class with Dr. Strip here in Berkeley. Was, oh my God, 1962, 50 years ago, and we became friends, and then we became roommates. in my life all these years. I have to thank Jeff for introducing us. And everybody said so many beautiful, wonderful things about him that I don't want to dwell on those. The thing that got to me was the idea that many of us now have less of our lives before us and more of it in the past. And I'm trying to make sense out of death. You see, the end of life issues seem to haunt a lot of us. I mean, and as Jeff might have said one time, or I heard it from somebody, that growing old isn't for sissies. And it's clear that the warranty has expired, and we are now on a path of day to day with no guarantees. When Jeff said, he called and said that he had cancer and it did not look good, I felt at such a loss as to what to say that I could say to help my old friend. But somehow these end-of-life issues can change our philosophy a bit. And yesterday, we were at the Jack London Square, and on the plaque below the London statue there's something like this is said that as a young man, Jack led a full life, a worthwhile life, meant to move like a meteor, not to just exist, but that to engage life to its fullest, take advantage of every second. And Jeff and I talked about that kind of thing, and we talked about like Dylan Thomas's poem to his father, "Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at those that take. Rage, rage against the dying of the light." We talked about that and how great it was, and it was my feeling that's what you should do also. And Archibald MacLeish and Andrew Marvell, all those people are to his coy mistress. Had we but whirled enough in time, this coyness lady were no crime. We would sit down and blah, 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 and then worms shall try that long preserved virginity, and your great honor turn to dust, and into ashes is all my love. And now, therefore, while thy youthful hue sits on thy skin like morning dew, while thy willing soul transpires at every pore with instant fire, now let us pour this blah, 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 all this. Thus, though we cannot make our sun stand still, yet we shall make it run. That kind of thing, that we got to live every moment to its fullest. I don't believe that anymore. And in essence, I think now, what would I say now that it's too late? This idea that we talked about death, life, being strong. Now that Jeff is gone, I feel terrible and hurt. And yesterday when I saw that thing about Jack London, I said, that's a young person. That's someone who's young. Talks about living life to its fullest. That every second counts. And that you can't stop the sun, but you can make, push, 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 push. We have to be strong. We have to be productive. We have to be brave. We have to be courageous. All those kinds of things. And now I think, when you get to be at this stage of our life, when there's more that you have of history than you have in your future, it's okay to be weak. It's okay to just be. And we can be happy if we have another sunrise. And we know that, hey, there's always another book, and the work is never finished. So tomorrow's another day. And we don't have to make time run anymore. We can look at nature's rhythms. And what I think is important now is maybe just to feel some peace and tranquility, to feel connected to our loved ones and nature. And it's quite enough to rest in peace before your end. I think if you could just rest in peace before your end, it would be a blessing. And thanks, Jeff, for teaching us all a lot about life.
On the I knew Jeff since we were 19 and were at Berkeley together and followed Joan Baez and Sproul Hall during the free speech movement, and we shared all of those years and times. But fast forward, I spent some very memorable and precious afternoons with Jeff, as a number of you did. And one afternoon in his last weeks, I brought him Bob Haas's poems. This is timely because we are turning to poetry. I brought him a book of Bob Haas's poems, and he was so pleased. And he said to me that all my life I've read political theory, economics, political science, and now all I want to read is poetry. So that afternoon we read each other poems from Haas and from Wallace Stevens. And incredibly, this poem that he said is the perfect poem is in our program, and I'll just read it. The Snowman by Wallace Stevens. One must have a mind of winter to regard the frost and the boughs of the pine trees crusted with snow, and have been cold a long time to behold the junipers shagged with ice, the spruces rough in the distant glitter of the January sun, and not to think of any misery in the sound of the wind, in the sound of a few leaves, which is the sound of the land full of the same wind that is blowing in the same bare place, for the listener who listens in the snow, and nothing himself beholds nothing that is not there and the nothing that is.
We'll do one more and then one.
My name is Jackie Goldberg. I came up from Los Angeles this morning because Mike Cogan couldn't make it. He wanted me to bring condolences to the family. Because my brother Art couldn't make it. He wanted me to bring condolences to the family. And Steve DeCanio and a bunch of us. We all kind of grew up together on Berkeley together. But I got to know Jeff again. I was lucky. Because when I was unelected official in Sacramento, 6 dreadful years of my life, Steve was in Sacramento. We'd have dinner. We'd talk about our sons. My son was not too much different in age than his. And we would compare notes and worry about them and hope that everything worked out well for them. And it has. And it has. He loved you so. He loved your family so. And that's really mostly what we talked about. We tried to talk about politics, but we really couldn't. We had too many years of history, and we had to talk about family. And I just wanted to come and say that he meant a great deal to a great number of people who could not be here today. And I wanted to just represent them and giving our condolences to the family. He will be truly missed.
We need time to share and meet each other a little bit, so we'd like to end this with the Kaddish with Jeff's grandchildren, Sonia and Eli.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. As Steve introduced us, we're Sonia and Eli Lustig, Jeff's grandchildren. We're going to recite the Mourner's Kaddish. And just as I said, it is a prayer that is recited and not chanted or sung because of the times at which it's necessary. So feel free to read along or recite along with us. Thank you. Yikra Yikadash Shmei Rabah Ve'alma Divra Pirotei Ve'amlik Malhutei Ve'chayechon U'yomechon U'chaye Ve'chol Beit Yisrael Va'agala U'vizman Kariv V'maru Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabah Mborach La'alam U'almei Almaya Yitbarach Shavach, Viet Pa'ar, Viet Ramam, Viet Naseh, Viet Tadar, Viet Taleh, Viet Talal, Shmeda Kudashah, Barichu. Le'ela min ko pirchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, damiran ve'alma v'yamaru. Amen. Yehesh lama rabba min shamayim, ve'achim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'yamaru. Amen. O say shalom b'mromav, Uya say shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, v'yamaru.